You're listening to Faith, Stewardship, and Insurance, Protecting Texas Churches. The show that gives pastors and church leaders the clarity they need to protect their people, property, and ministry.
Welcome back to Faith, Stewardship, and Insurance, Protecting Texas Churches. I'm your host, Ron Wadley, with Insurance for Texans. We help church leaders to protect their people and property with wisdom and clarity. Today, we're talking about something every Texas church needs to think about before the first big storm shows up on the radar. In Texas, there are 2 storm seasons, and neither of them announce themselves politely. If you don't understand your insurance coverage before a storm hits your church, you can find yourself exposed in ways you never expected. Kevin's church knew these things well. Located just outside Austin, the church had weathered many storms over the years. Hail had damaged their building several times. Repairs were made, and life went on. Then this year, their insurance renewal arrived, and things took a turn. The board expected the usual rate increase. Instead, they discovered 2 major changes to their policy that were buried in the fine print. The hail deductible had doubled, and the roof was no longer covered for full replacement if hail damage occurred. They understood that if a serious storm hit, the church would be responsible for a massive portion of the repair costs. With spring storm season right around the corner, they were glad that they had reviewed their policy and knew what to expect. They realized trusting coverage without reviewing it was no longer an option. Many Texas churches don't realize that wind and hail deductibles often work differently than other deductibles. Instead of a flat dollar amount, they're usually a percentage of the building's insured value. For Kevin's church, a jump from a 2% deductible to 5% meant tens of thousands of dollars out of pocket before insurance paid a dime. Then there was the roof issue. Their policy had quietly shifted hail coverage from replacement cost to actual cash value. That means that the insurance company would subtract depreciation before they issued the church a check for the roof replacement. In other words, an older roof might only be covered for a fraction of what it costs to replace. These changes are becoming common across Texas. If you haven't reviewed your policy recently, you may already be carrying more risk than you think. Another issue churches run into is assuming no visible damage means no problem. Several months ago, a different church in town experienced damage from an overnight hailstorm. No leaks showed up right away, so they moved on. Months later, a small water stain appeared in the sanctuary ceiling. When a roofer finally inspected the roof, hail damage was obvious. But by then, the insurance company denied the claim. The damage hadn't been reported soon enough after the storm. Hail damage isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's subtle and slow. That's why timely inspections and documentation matter so much after severe weather, even when everything looks fine at first glance. Once Kevin's church understood how exposed they were, they looked for solutions. One option that made sense was a deductible buy-down policy. This is separate coverage designed to help offset large wind and hail deductibles. Instead of scrambling to raise cash after a storm, the church could reduce the financial hit and protect its reserves. For churches facing high deductibles, this kind of planning can make the difference between recovery and crisis. Kevin's board was grateful they caught these issues before spring storms arrived. They had time to adjust coverage, set expectations, and protect the church financially. Storm season is not the time to discover fine print. It's the time to execute a plan you already understand. That's what faithful stewardship looks like. Not fear, not panic, just clarity. If your church hasn't reviewed its wind and hail coverage recently, now is the time. Visit insurancefortexans.com and connect with our church insurance team. And if you want a clearer framework for making confident insurance decisions year-round, get your copy of our book, The Promise of Certainty, at thepromiseofcertainty.com. I'm Ron Wadley. This has been Faith, Stewardship, and Insurance, Protecting Texas Churches. Until next time, remember, preparing wisely keeps your church from facing a crisis later.
Thanks for listening to Faith, Stewardship and Insurance. Until next time, remember, insurance isn't just about policies. It's about safeguarding the mission God has called you to lead.